Hello everyone and welcome to the GenAISCript channel. My name is Pele and today I'm going to talk about adding variables to your context using the function def. And this is a very common way in your GenAISCript to inject user data into your script and differentiate it from the prompt. Also gives you pretty good context in terms of limiting how much input goes into the prompt and so forth. All right, so if you go to the docs, you'll see that you can search for def. And it'll take you to a page that talks about the context, in particular about this function that is called def. And in a nutshell, whenever you call def with a name, it's going to render it something like this. And actually, these days, probably using some XML, but it takes the input you give it and tries to render it in a way that the LM is going to treat it as a variable. It's probably going to look like this these days. All right, so let's take a look at how we use this in VS Code. And we're going to switch here, and we're going to create a script that is summarizing files. So I can run this. I've had this little bug in my dev setup, but yeah, here we go. It's running and it's generating Python, so we've got it set up. I have here all these files here. There's a bunch of files. So we're going to set it up so that we slurp in all these files. And then we're going to work on the context. So I'm going to say summarize content. Summarize files. And here, what I'm going to do, and this is where you use def. You can say def, pick a name, and then put all kinds of things in here, including a bunch of files. So here I'm going to say 5. Now when I do this, let's take a look at the trace. And you can see that the files have been inlined in the prompt. This is the user context, and the content has been added. There's a whole bunch of stuff and all these files are added to the context. At the end, we got the summarization. So he went ahead and did that, but let's take a look at what we can do in here. So for example, maybe we only care about these bicep files. So we can say, I only want .bicep. So that's a clean way, a quick way to make sure you don't bring in files you're not interested in. In fact, there's a whole bunch of other options that you can use to control how this macro works. For example, one that is useful is ignore empty. So if it turns out that this file is optional and you're not using it, just ignore it. Then you can put that. You can specify the language. You can also extract you can add line numbers. Line numbers are interesting when you try to position precisely things in a file. So we're going to say true. So for example, here we can say find potential issues in file. Right, so we're doing a little enter, and because I'm adding line numbers, it will, and you can see that line numbers have been added here. So it should, so it's not reporting the line number, but we have to tell it to do that. There's in fact a use annotation format. There's a built-in format for that, but also you could say report line number and file name for issues. Prompt it. All right, so now we got the lines. Format is not great, but it is doing something. It is not using a format that's the one we would want. So there's, just so you know, there is a built-in format that kind of triggers in when you use errors. And it doesn't. As annotations. Let's see if we are more lucky. Oh, there we go. So now we trigger our micro format, and this is parsed, and we get nice errors, which in VS Code would show up with squiggles. You can see that they've been added to our VS Code, and then you can actually go there and see that. Yeah. It found it and then put the squiggle, and then we can use, and probably there's a problem with this file. All right, let's go back to def. So we have line numbers. Now you can also say something like max tokens 100. So if we have a tokenizer, if we don't, we'll approximate it. But this is going to apply to every file that we want to put into the trace. And you can see that ... we ran out of tokens. So that's a pretty crude way to do that. Now what you could do is you could say flex, true. Oh, flex, you could say you give it a value. And then you can say max. Where is it? We have to specify the flex token somewhere. So you give a budget of, let's say, 10,000 flex token. And each file is going to use one, and it's going to be distributed around all the files. So I'm going to put you to 1,000. And now you can see that there's going to be some ... It stopped. Actually, maybe I have enough. Yeah, it's here, ... The reason for that is if we go into the script, you'll see that while we're rendering the prompt, we had to flex. So we flexed up the files so that they were, and you could change this value to change how much you want to allocate per file. So there's a few ways we're able to control dynamically, also based on how I lost my train of thought here. Yeah, based on how the underlying model can work, how we can optimize inlining this project. Now, a nice thing is you can, so let's go back. Let's call these bicep. So, but we can have multiple variables. So we could say readme, and that's the file that ends with readme. So use information from readme. And then I think here we also have, what do we have? Some deploy file. And there's some PowerShell script as well, and some metadata. So we're going to say metadata, and it's metadata.json. And here we're just going to say, make sure the metadata is correct. And here we can say metadata. So we're using all these names that we defined, and consistent with bicep. So very flexible, very easy to kind of define your context and then reason about it later on. This is our script. And you know what? I'm going to stop the annotation. Let's say explain bicep. Bicep for someone who does not understand Azure Cloud. All right, so let's try to figure out what's going on in there. We got the key concept, we got the README, and the metadata consistency. Let's review that. Yeah, so it's doing something. But most importantly, we've used the def function to build a context. If we were going to do a nested prompt by doing run prompt, then what you would do is to use the nested def. So you have here, I'm not using the global one. I'm using the one that came from the prompt builder. And so that's important, so otherwise you're going to mix things up. All right, so to recap, we've got a global function here called def, and it's used to build these variables that use content. And here I was using the built-in files that were coming from here, but worth mentioning, I could put other things here. So I could put just text. I could load files from somewhere. So I could read some text and load the files somewhere. So it's pretty flexible, and it slurps a lot of things in and formats them properly for the LLM. And that's a function that I'm going to use a lot in your script. All right. So this concludes the video. Make sure you subscribe, and happy hacking.